Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's now 3:30, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this year's symposium on the Garfield-AF registry. I'm AJ Kakkar from London, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here. At the outset, I would like to recognise the support that we received by way of an unrestricted research grant from Bayer Pharma to support the Garfield programme, which has now been ongoing for some years. And I'd also like to show you my own personal disclosures, which I shall leave up here for a moment. Now, Garfield is a programme that's been running since the end of 2009, the beginning of 2010, and currently it's the largest prospective registry in the field of atrial fibrillation. We've had the privilege as a group of investigators to work together in some 35 countries around the world, and during the course of the 5 cohorts, I've had the privilege of working with over 1,000 clinical sites that have come from different clinical care backgrounds, specialist hospital practice, cardiology practice, general medicine, and a large number of centres in primary care. To date, we have now completed recruitment of the 5th cohort of Garfield, and some 57,000 patients are enrolled, of whom some 52,000 are newly diagnosed within 6 weeks of presentation, AF patients who have been prospectively followed from that time of diagnosis for some years, and eventually, but of course follow-up for the programme is not complete, some 2 to 8 years. And as I say, 5 sequential cohorts have now been included, and I'd like to express my own personal gratitude and that of the steering committee to all the clinicians, their staff, and in particular their patients who have allowed their data to be included in this important registry. So this is the distribution of countries around the world that have participated in the Garfield-AF programme. As I say, we've now completed recruitment to the final cohort, and the number of patients included stands at some 57,262. You can see here, just for reference, the design of the programme. We started at the end of 2009 recruiting to the 1st cohort. The 2nd cohort, 3rd, 4th and 5th have recruited sequentially. And as we've become more successful at running the programme, so recruitment has become a steady cohort in every year of the programme since the original outset. We then have a minimum of 2 years follow-up for each of the cohorts, but extended follow-up for the early cohorts, which provides the opportunity for us eventually to have data ranging from some 2 to 8 years of follow-up, depending upon which cohort patients were included. This is an independent initiative supervised by an independent steering committee of distinguished colleagues, many of whom are here today either presenting or in the audience, and supported by an equally distinguished 35-member National Coordinator Council who lead the programme in each of the 35 participating countries. We at the outset had the view that we would try and randomly select sites from different care environments based upon the distribution of care environments for AF patients as specified by the national coordinators, and then take prospective or prospectively followed patients consecutively included in the registry. Of note has been the emphasis on data quality, and in the programme 20% of source data is actually audited, and that source data verification compared to the data entered through the electronic data capture system. And Professor Keith Fox and Professor Bernard Gersh from the Mayo Clinic have led that audit programme and are about to publish their findings, which indicate some consistency of some 96% between the data identified at source in the patient's clinical records and that included in the submitted data to the registry, which is high for this type of methodology outcomes research. And so here we are now looking at the baseline data in terms of the baseline treatment interventions across the 5 cohorts. And you can see between 2010 and 11, where the red bar, the innovation in anticoagulation, the introduction of the direct oral anticoagulants, responsible for 4.2% of patients receiving anticoagulation in that first cohort, to some 43% of patients included in this last cohort between the summer of 2015 and the end of July this year. So a substantial change in the emphasis with regard to the use of innovations in anticoagulation to protect patients against thromboembolic stroke in newly diagnosed AF. You can see the blue bars, the use of vitamin K antagonists diminishing as a consequence, and overall a slight increase from some 57% of patients newly presenting with AF receiving some form of anticoagulation in 2010-11 to 71% in 2015-16. So clear changes in the patterns of practice around the world in these 35 countries. And when we started this programme, we wanted to try and achieve some focus with regard to how the large amount of data available from a prospective outcomes registry might be marshalled to help inform clinical practice and help us all as clinicians achieve better and better clinical outcomes for our patients. And today we're going to focus from data looking at how better we might risk stratify patients presenting with atrial fibrillation in terms of understanding both their risk of death, of stroke, and of bleeding, and then start to better understand and develop insights into practices around trying to prevent thromboembolic stroke, understand what types of patients receive the different interventions available, and try and understand whether our clinical practice is consistent from what we have learned from prospective clinical trials. And that's where we're going to focus our symposium today. Really starting to look now at this very large data set in routine clinical practice and ask some simple questions. Can we better risk profile? Can we improve therapeutic targeting to ensure those patients, appropriate patients who need intervention to prevent stroke, actually receive it in the appropriate fashion? Do we understand what drives prescribing practice in the world today, and how that understanding might help us improve the way that we all serve our patients? And finally, to focus on the early disease burden. What happens to patients in those early weeks and months after presentation with atrial fibrillation? Because we take patients, or try to take patients, so early in their natural history that we can start to understand what the true burden is early after diagnosis with atrial fibrillation. You will see some exciting data from the registry in all of those areas today. Now, for the baseline data, we only use the prospective patients in the registry. In the first cohort, we had some retrospective patients to better understand how sites were practicing before they were invited to participate in a registry. So the baseline data you see here will be on all 5 cohorts, some 51,000 patients. Cohorts with 1-year outcomes represent nearly 40,000 prospective patients in the registry. And where you see data on 2-year outcomes, it will be from the first 3 cohorts, and it will be some 28,000 patients' data that you will see presented in the symposium.